floodplain edge near Garissa, early morning. Water moved fast over the broken gravel path, curling brown and thick around the cement posts where the culvert had fractured overnight. The sky was still gray from the storm that passed, and the township's lower stretch was quiet. Shutters closed, market stalls abandoned, only the sound of water scraping against metal and the distant cough of goats on higher ground. Along the roadside bend, where a torn blue sack clung to a bush, something darker shifted in the current. It wasn't trash, it wasn't still. A dog, half submerged, was being pulled sideways toward the gully mouth. Yusuf had seen it before others. He'd come looking for his cousin's cart, swept away the night before, but the moment he saw the shape, he stepped into the water without calling out. The current reached his knees within 2 steps, then his thighs, then his waist. The dog turned slowly in the pull, legs limp, eyes barely open. Her body moved like cloth, not flesh. If she passed the culvert's mouth, she'd be gone in seconds. Yusuf lunged with a short cry, one hand gripping a root, the other wrapping fast around the dog's belly. She didn't resist. She didn't move. By the time he staggered back, the water soaked up to his chest, his arms ached from holding her weight. The dog hung against him like a soaked bundle of reeds. Head low, one paw twisted oddly beneath the belly, her tongue slipping out between her teeth. She was breathing, but only just. The air was thick with river silt. A chicken cried out somewhere behind them. A boy ran to fetch a dry cloth, but Yusuf was already kneeling, setting her down carefully on the upper step near the ditch wall. Her coat was light brown but washed pale by mud. Every rib showed, each one pushing out against loose skin that sagged with hunger and soaked weight. Her tail didn't flick. Her nose touched the cement, unmoving. Yusuf pressed one hand to her side. The chest rose once, faintly. Again, slower. Then again. If she stopped breathing, she would die before help came. If they moved her too fast, her lungs might flood again. The stakes were simple. Stay calm. Keep her warm. Don't let her slip. Someone handed Yusuf a shawl. He laid it across the dog's back. A woman watching from a doorway whispered something, and her child repeated it. She came from the riverside. No one knew how long she'd been in the water, but she had floated downstream from somewhere upstream, alone, silent, and barely alive. She made one sound then, a thin, dry moan, soft as wind. Her ear twitched once. Yusuf leaned down and whispered, "You're out now." He didn't pet her. He just stayed beside her, watching the rise and fall of her side, measuring every breath like it was the only thing holding her to earth. Rain started again, not hard, just light drops clicking on tin roofs. The culvert hissed. The road would close soon, but the dog had not let go. She had not stopped, and that was enough, for now. Yusuf crouched beside the step, one hand steady on the dog's side. Her breath stuttered beneath his palm. Too slow, too shallow. The water had soaked into every part of her, but even without it, her body told the same truth. Starved, spent. Her belly was drawn tight beneath pale skin. Her ribs curved like the bones of a dry leaf. Barely covered. Her fur, once golden, was now dulled with river mud and patchy from old hunger. She did not lift her head when he shifted. Her eyes didn't follow the soft movements of the boy bringing a second shawl. She remained still in the way of animals who have no energy left to flee. Not calm, just empty. Yusuf moved with care. He folded his jacket once, twice, then slid his hands under her front legs and lifted her into it. Her limbs dangled, lifeless but warm. That warmth mattered. She was not cold yet. That meant there was still time. If they moved her now, kept her dry, let her rest, she might recover. But if they waited too long, if she slipped deeper into that stillness, there would be no pulling her back, no bark, no sound, just breath or not. The boy pointed toward the corner of the abandoned tea stall. Yusuf nodded and walked, slow and steady, each step measured for balance. The water had reached the foundation but hadn't crept further. He set the dog down in the curve of 2 crates stacked near the wall. The concrete there was dry. She didn't shift as her body touched it. Only her chest moved. Shallow, rhythmic, barely there. Her ear twitched once when the wind shifted. Yusuf covered her with the jacket and part of the second shawl. She did not resist. Her front paw slid sideways and stopped. The marketplace stayed quiet. A few men were hauling sandbags. A woman called softly for her goat. One vendor, barefoot, handed Yusuf a half-empty bottle of glucose water without a word. Yusuf held it near the dog's mouth, tilted it slightly. The liquid touched her lip and slid down the side. No swallow, no movement. He tried again. A single drop entered her mouth, then another. Her throat moved. Once, then stopped. But it had moved. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Her body shivered lightly beneath the jacket. Not from cold. From exhaustion, Yusuf guessed. The kind that settles in after too many nights without shelter, too many days walking under hunger. Her breath rattled once. She blinked, slowly, but didn't lift her head. No protest, no panic, no effort to rise. Yusuf brushed the flies from her muzzle. She blinked again, then closed her eyes. "She's tired," the boy whispered. Yusuf didn't answer. The floodwaters were still rising behind them. Roads were closing. The clinic was too far to reach on foot in this state. If she moved too soon, the strain could stop her heart. But if they waited too long, the cold would settle deeper. Either choice held risk. He dipped the edge of the shawl into the glucose and touched it gently to her lips. Her tongue twitched. One paw pulled slightly inward, like a reflex. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused. No sound, but she was still here, still trying. Wind picked up across the open stalls. Rain threatened again in the clouds above. Yusuf stayed kneeling beside her, watching for every sign, every shift of breath. She didn't rise, but her chest lifted again and again, soft and fragile. That was the only sound between them, a rhythm not yet broken. Yusuf shifted the corner of the shawl again, tucking it gently beneath the dog's hip where the wind kept lifting it. The concrete behind the old bus stop held a little warmth, soaked in from the earlier sun, but the air had cooled now. The clouds were thick again, low and heavy, and the scent of wet metal lingered around them. The rain had paused, but the water hadn't stopped. Behind the shelter, the drainage ditch had already swallowed part of the footpath, and the small culvert road Yusuf had crossed earlier was no longer visible. They had no way out until the water dropped. He stayed crouched beside her, watching the rhythm of her ribs like a slow clock. The dog had not moved since the last flicker of her ear. Her head remained pressed to the ground, her muzzle tipped slightly sideways, breath rattling from deep in her chest. Her eyes had closed again, not from sleep, but the slow retreat of energy. Yusuf knew this stillness. He'd seen it before in goats pulled from the river after long storms. It didn't mean peace. It meant the line was thin. If she slipped further, there would be no sound. No jerk of limbs, only the quiet end of effort. He wrung out the cloth in his hand and wiped the mud from her back legs, gentle strokes, not to clean, but to stir her skin, keep her from sinking. The fur there was rough and brittle, clumped at the haunches. A patch of skin near her spine showed old scarring, pink, cracked, long healed over but left without cover. The muscle had wasted beneath it. She had been starving before the water took her. That was clear now. Even dry, her legs held no strength. Her paw remained folded under, pads shriveled and gray. Her nails were long, chipped at the ends from walking too far too long. A man from the higher path stepped down briefly, handed Yusuf a cup of maize broth. Yusuf nodded once, but didn't drink. Instead, he dipped the corner of his cloth into the warm liquid and held it to the dog's lips. It touched, slid down, disappeared. Her mouth didn't open, but after a few seconds her throat shifted. A swallow. Faint, but real. Yusuf pressed the cloth again. Another twitch, slower. Then, stillness. It was the only sign he would get, but it was enough to try again. If her throat kept moving, even weakly, she could hold on longer, but if it stopped, she wouldn't last the hour. She breathed out sharply. One side of her body flinched. Not a full movement, just the faint tension of a nerve. Her ear twitched again. Yusuf reached out and touched the base of it, firm but light. "Stay with me, girl," he said quietly. She did not lift her head, but the paw that had been twisted under her body shifted slightly outward, her claws scraping faintly against the cement. A reflex, maybe. Or a reply. No way to know. The wind stirred the top of the awning. A plastic bag drifted across the water's edge. Somewhere near the mosque wall, a goat cried out. The town was still mostly silent, holding its breath as the water pressed in from both sides. The roads had split now. No exit, no transport. If she needed a vet, there would be no getting her to one today. Yusuf placed the last of the cloth across her side, tucking it in like you would for a sleeping child, even though he knew she wasn't resting. She was holding on. That was all. Her ribs rose again, slower than before. Then again. Then once more. The breath came like water dripping from a damaged pipe. Irregular, but continuing. It would be a long wait, nothing else to do but watch. And keep her warm. The light thinned behind the shelter, turning soft and gray. Yusuf stayed kneeling, quiet, unmoving. Across from them, the flood inched forward, but her chest still moved. Yusuf leaned in, adjusting the shawl across her side where the breeze slipped underneath. Her body was still warm, but barely. The cloth pressed damp against her rib cage, the shallow rise of breath now spaced longer than before. Her limbs remained folded, unresponsive. Only the occasional flick of her ear offered a sign of resistance left in her. If she didn't gain strength soon, the night would close in harder. Cold and exhaustion would do what the water hadn't. He exhaled slowly, reaching down to lift her into his arms once more, hoping she might hold her weight better this time. But before his hands made contact, a sound broke the hush behind him. It wasn't wind, nor the settling of waterlogged wood. It was smaller, living. He turned his head sharply. The noise came again, faint, almost missed, a soft, wet whimper. Yusuf scanned the edge of the road, eyes narrowing. The sound came from a crumpled sack wedged beneath a rusted wheelbarrow, half covered in reeds. The fabric was blue, torn at the seams, barely holding shape. It shifted slightly, as if something inside was too weak to push, but still trying. Yusuf stepped over, crouched, and pulled the top open with both hands. Inside, curled in a corner of the torn plastic, were two puppies, drenched, silent now, their furs slick with rainwater and dirt. One moved its head weakly, the other lay still except for a trembling flank. He reached in without pause. The smaller pup was cold but breathing. The other twitched when touched, front paw splayed stiffly outward. Neither cried, neither blinked. They had stopped calling for help hours ago, or maybe longer. Yusuf cradled both against his chest and brought them over to where the mother lay. Her body didn't rise. Her eyes didn't open. But when he placed the pups beside her stomach, her nostrils flared. Once, then again. Her neck didn't move, but her breath came quicker, short and sharp. Her paw shifted. One toe dragged across the cloth. The pups pressed blindly toward her belly but found no milk, only warmth. Yusuf knelt beside them, shielding their small bodies from the wind. One pup let out a quiet wheeze. The sound barely rose above the water lapping at the curb, but the mother's ear twitched again. Her body, though still limp, curved slightly toward them. Not enough to rise, but enough to shelter. Yusuf laid the corner of his jacket over the three of them and cupped his hand gently over the nearest pup's back. If he'd waited 5 more minutes, the water would have reached the sack. If he'd left earlier, the sound would have gone unheard. The risk now was doubled. The mother could not nurse. Her body had nothing left to give. If her condition worsened, the pups would be orphaned before they were strong enough to suckle. If the pups grew cold again, they wouldn't survive the hour. Yusuf knew they needed more than warmth. They needed shelter, food, and time, but none of that could come until the waters dropped. Until then, all he could offer was presence. He adjusted the shawl one last time. The puppies nestled closer, their bodies pressed against the faint heat of her side. One let out a sharp breath, more exhale than cry. Her eyes did not open, but her paw moved again, curling slightly inward, just enough to touch the pup's leg. The gesture was brief, unsteady, but it was movement. Yusuf lowered his hand to her neck and whispered, "They're here." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet soil and diesel from the far road. Behind them, the edge of the flood moved quietly toward the next row of market stalls. But beside the wall, a quiet stillness had formed. The mother, the pups, and the man who had not yet stood up. The sky above them held low and pale, waiting. The sky had begun to clear in patches above the flooded township. The light that filtered through was pale and damp, touching the edges of the market walls with a dull shimmer. Yusuf stayed close to the makeshift bedding, where the mother dog and her 2 pups lay bundled together beneath the folds of an old shawl and his jacket. The water had not reached them yet, but it moved steadily across the lower road, inching toward the stalls with quiet certainty. The people nearby had retreated to the upper path. Only Yusuf remained where he was, his hands pressed to the cloth now soaked with shared breath and body heat. The puppies had settled against her belly, their tiny frames trembling in uneven bursts. They didn't cry anymore. One paw twitched upward, seeking something that wasn't there. Her milk had not come in. Her body could not offer more than warmth, but it was something. And in that something, they pressed deeper. Yusuf leaned forward again, wringing the last warmth from a cloth when he felt the shift beside him. The mother's head lifted. Slow, shaking, but deliberate. Her eyes opened, unfocused, clouded with fatigue, and her neck stretched toward the sound of her pups. It was not a strong movement. Her chin only rose inches from the cloth, but her ears pulled forward and her nostrils widened as if drawing them in by scent alone. Then, with visible effort, she nosed one of the pups gently. It startled, shifting beneath her breath. Her nose touched the tiny flank, held there. Then she exhaled and collapsed again, the side of her face pressing hard into the fabric. The gesture was simple, but it broke the stillness. She had known they were hers. Even in this state, her instinct to reach for them had surfaced. Yusuf watched, silent. He did not touch her. There was no need. Her body had spoken in that one moment more clearly than anything else since the rescue. She had not drifted downstream by accident. She had come for them. What followed was silence. The wind had dropped, the air thick again with moisture. A soft sound rose in the distance, the creaking of a gate loosening in the water's path. But beside the wall, nothing moved. The mother lay completely still again, her ribs rising faintly beneath the cloth. The pups nestled closer, blindly seeking the warmth her body could still offer. Yusuf watched her eyes close. They did not flutter. They did not roll. They simply shut, gently, without strain. If she'd tried to stand fully, she might have collapsed. If he had lifted her just a minute sooner, it might have stopped her from finding them. But now, having touched them, having known they lived, she had done what her body must have pushed her toward for hours in the water. The risk remained. Her muscles had not strengthened. Her chest still rose too slowly, and the pups needed nourishment she could not yet give. But they were no longer separated. That mattered. Yusuf leaned back against the base of the wall. His legs were cramping from the crouch, but he did not move far. He adjusted the jacket once more, careful not to touch her paws. They were curled loosely now, less twisted than before. One rested near the smallest pup's head. The sound of water moved closer behind them. But the mother's body remained still and warm, and her pups did not cry. A crow passed low overhead. Its shadow stretched wide across the roadside before vanishing again. Yusuf glanced up only briefly, then lowered his head once more. There would be no more gestures tonight, but the ones already made were enough. In the quiet that followed, all three bodies lay pressed together beneath the pale sky, hidden from the rising water by a stretch of wall and a man who had not walked away. The sun dipped low behind the far rooftops, leaving the market stretch in the kind of soft gray hush that follows long rain. Yusuf moved with measured care, clearing dry sacks from a shuttered maize stall and laying them flat beneath the shelter wall. The cloth around the mother dog had grown heavy with damp, so he unfolded a grain sack and layered it gently beneath her body. She did not stir, but her ribs still lifted in the slow rhythm they'd held since noon. The pups had curled in tighter, their small bellies rising with short, sharp breaths. The cold had not claimed them, not yet. People had begun to gather, not loud, not curious, just quiet shapes along the higher slope near the tea stand. An old man leaned against a wooden post, arms crossed. Two school-aged boys stood with hands in their pockets, whispering now and then. A young woman carrying a basket of green beans paused, watching. No one stepped closer at first. They simply stood, the way people do when the weight of something real reaches the edge of their routines. Yusuf glanced at them once, then returned to tucking the last corner of the jacket around the puppies. The wind had dropped, but the earth still held its wet chill. From the back of the crowd, an older woman walked forward. Her shawl was thick, hand-woven, the kind passed down for years. She didn't speak. She placed a steaming tin cup of chai next to Yusuf's foot, then rested her hand lightly on the wall. Her fingers were knotted and brown from work, the nails chipped. She looked at the dog for a moment, not in surprise, not in sorrow, then turned and stepped back without a word. Yusuf picked up the cup, let the steam drift near the mother's muzzle. Her nostrils moved faintly. The warmth registered, if nothing more. A boy, not more than 9, knelt beside the wall across from Yusuf. He didn't touch the dogs. He just sat with his knees drawn to his chest, watching them breathe. After a while, he tilted his head and said, "She came from the far bank. There's no bridge now." His voice was low, careful. Yusuf didn't correct him. The water had taken out the footbridge days ago. If the mother had crossed, she hadn't walked. She'd swum or floated. With that frail body through that current, only one reason could have made her try. The boy stayed where he was. A few others sat beside him. A vendor unwrapped a faded tarp and offered it to help cover the sacks. Yusuf accepted it, folding it over half the bedding to hold in what little heat remained. The dog's eyes opened briefly. One blink. Her ears didn't rise, but her neck twitched once when the tarp settled. A pup squeaked near her chest. She didn't respond, but her tail moved, just a twitch, against the cloth. The stakes had not changed. If the night brought wind, the cold would worsen. If her body failed to warm further, the pups would not last. If they stirred too often, they'd waste what energy they had. Yusuf had nothing left to offer but shelter and stillness. And now, that shelter was being held not just by his hands, but by the quiet presence of those who stayed nearby. None of them came to save. They came to remain. The road behind the market was half flooded now, glinting in the last light. Reflections swayed across the standing water. Somewhere far off, a gate rattled in the breeze. But at the base of the wall, the shawls held, the breath continued, and a woman's untouched chai cooled slowly on the stone. The first drops came just after dusk, soft, spaced apart, tapping gently along the edge of the tarp like a question asked quietly. Then the sky opened with more certainty, rain falling straight and cold onto the iron roofs, the clay gutters, and the shoulder-high sacks still stacked near the closed shops. The market emptied further. One man gathered his onions and pulled a wooden shutter into place. A girl called softly to her younger brother and pulled him toward the upper slope, but Yusuf didn't move. He sat against the same wall where the mother lay, legs crossed, arms resting loosely at his sides. The dog had shifted earlier, not far, just enough to adjust her weight around the pups. She had drawn her body in tighter, folding it in a curve that wrapped them like a hollow. Her spine remained low, tail tucked in, front legs pulled close beneath the jacket's fold. Her head lay flat, eyes half open beneath heavy lids. She had not tried to rise again, but she had not drifted back into stillness either. Each breath came slowly, but it came, paced, quiet even. Her ears twitched only when the tarp shook. One of the pups kicked out, found her flank, and settled again. Rain darkened the stone beneath them. The cloth Yusuf had used was soaked through now, but the layer of sacks underneath had held. The heat they'd built throughout the afternoon had not escaped entirely. He adjusted the edge of the tarp once, then leaned forward and used the side of his hand to slide a puddle away from the lower corner. It was a small action, but the water there had crept close. One deep puddle and the temperature would drop fast. And the risk had not changed. The mother's body was stretched thin, warmth only barely enough, protection hanging on instinct alone. If the rain chilled her too far, her breathing might fade. If the pups got wet again, even briefly, they would not recover. But she stayed, not because she was trapped, not because she lacked the strength to move, though that may have been true too. She stayed because the movement of her body had curved toward them. Her side pressed into their tiny backs. Her neck shifted when they stirred. That quiet recognition held them all there. Yusuf didn't speak. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. His jacket was soaked at the sleeves, but his hands remained where they had been, one near her flank, the other ready at the tarp's edge. She didn't respond to him now, but she hadn't turned away either. And when one pup rolled outward into the rain's reach, she pulled him back without lifting her head. The rain thickened, drumming against the metal awning behind them. Somewhere near the grain store, a loose rope slapped once, then again. But the wall beside them held. And under the small pocket of cloth, 3 lives pressed against one another in a slow exchange of heat. The pups breathed in quick, faint rhythms. Their paws moved once every few minutes, soft, uncoordinated. They were too young to know cold in the way that kills. They only knew warmth, and her ribs beneath them still rose. Yusuf exhaled through his nose. His back ached from the angle. His fingers had begun to stiffen, but he did not leave. The rain slid across the stone in little rivers. A plastic bottle floated slowly through the lower path. Farther up, the last light of evening faded behind the rooftops, drawing long shadows down across the ground. And still she stayed, curled, unmoving, silent. The pups did not cry, and for now, the cold had not won. In the growing dark, her shape held steady, a fragile circle of breath beneath the falling rain. The light broke gently over the hills, soft and diffused through layers of thinning cloud. Rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving a damp hush across the market path. The road, once drowned in the steady push of floodwater, had begun to reappear in patches, gravel and silt scattered like dust left behind by retreating tide. The culvert still ran high, but its voice had quieted. A few birds called from the fence posts. One rooster moved slowly across a rooftop, shaking droplets from his feathers. The sacks beneath the wall were still soaked at the corners, but held their shape. The tarp, weighed down with overnight rain, sagged slightly in the middle. Yusuf adjusted it without waking the pups. Their bodies were tucked close beneath the mother's chest now, bellies full with borrowed warmth. They had not stirred for nearly an hour, resting with small feet splayed outward, noses pressed into the fold of her foreleg. The smaller one twitched once, then settled again. The mother's ribs rose evenly beneath them. She hadn't stood, not yet, but her breath had grown steadier, deeper. The trembling that once haunted her limbs had lessened. Her eyes, when they opened, stayed open longer. And when Yusuf placed his hand near her neck to replace the cloth, she did not pull away. Her skin twitched lightly under his touch, then went still again. He unwrapped a clean bowl from his bag, a small metal one, dented but dry, and poured in a little broth from the thermos. The scent drifted slowly into the air. Steam curled along the edge of the jacket. He set the bowl down just outside the tarp's reach, not forcing it close, not calling. The scent would carry on its own. She didn't move at first. Her ears remained low, tail curled inward. But as the warmth reached her nostrils, her head lifted. Slow, deliberate, without effort, wasted. She did not sniff the bowl. She turned instead, just slightly, toward Yusuf. Her eyes met his hand resting near the sack edge, and she leaned forward. Not far, just enough to press the tip of her muzzle once, lightly against his knuckles. The gesture held no urgency. It asked for nothing. Then she turned her head again, lowering her neck back toward the pups. Her nose brushed one, then stilled. Yusuf didn't speak. He let the quiet settle between them. There was no need to mark the moment with words. The flood had not taken her. Hunger had not stopped her. The cold had not reached the core of her body where instinct had held steady through the night. A motorbike passed slowly along the upper path, careful of the slick curve. A shopkeeper opened a creaking shutter. Somewhere farther off, a boy shouted for a lost chicken. Life resumed, but near the shelter wall, it resumed slowly, without sound. Yusuf pulled the tarp aside an inch to let the air dry the fabric's edge. He left the bowl where it stood. The puppies breathed in rhythm now, their sides rising with their mother's warmth, not fear. The sun reached their paws last, painting the cement gold as it slid through the cracks in the clouds. Yusuf stayed seated, his hand resting lightly beside the sack. Nothing moved for a while. Then the light stretched across the slope, soft and wide, and the first shadow of wind rippled the puddle near the road's edge. The water kept falling. The sky kept opening. And beneath the shelter wall, all three slept on.